The Nimrud Lens. In 1850, the archaeologist Austin Henry Layard was excavating the throne room of the Assyrian palace of Nimrud in modern-day Iraq. Buried beneath tons of earth, amidst the colossal winged bulls and reliefs of kings, he found an object that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't gold, and it wasn't a weapon. It was a piece of rock crystal, ground into a precise oval shape. This object, now known as the Nimrud Lens, is dated to approximately 750 BCE. According to the history books, the first lenses were crafted in Europe around the 13th century, and the telescope wasn't invented until 1608 by Dutch spectacle makers. Yet, here, resting in the dust of ancient Mesopotamia, was a piece of optical technology 3,000 years old. The lens is not a crude piece of polished glass. It is ground from natural rock crystal, a material much harder to work with than glass, and shaped into a plano-convex form. When Layard found it, he immediately noted its magnifying properties. He wrote that it could have been used to engrave the microscopic cuneiform text found on Assyrian clay tablets, text so small that modern scholars often need magnifying glasses just to read it. This raises the immediate shortcut question. If the scribes needed lenses to read the text, didn't they need lenses to write it? Mainstream science has tried desperately to categorize this object as decorative. The British Museum labels it as a piece of inlay for furniture, perhaps a button. But this explanation falls apart when you analyze the physics. Buttons do not require optical grinding. In the 19th century, Sir David Brewster, a physicist and the inventor of the kaleidoscope, examined the lens. He didn't see a button. He saw a complex optical instrument. He noted that the lens had a focal length of about 4.5 inches, and, most shockingly, appeared to be ground into a toroidal shape to correct for astigmatism. Correcting astigmatism is a complex optical feat that modern optometry only mastered recently. To suggest the Assyrians did this by accident while making a piece of furniture is statistically impossible. But what were they looking at? While it certainly helped with microscopic craftsmanship, the real secret may lie in the sky. The Assyrians were master astronomers. They tracked the movements of the planets with mathematical precision. There are passages in Assyrian tablets that describe the planet Saturn as a god surrounded by a ring of serpents. To the naked eye, Saturn is just a dot of light. You cannot see the rings. Galileo was the first human to officially see them in 1610, and even he was confused by what he saw. If the Assyrians describe Saturn as being encircled, it implies they saw it. If the Nimrud lens was part of a larger mechanism, perhaps a wooden or leather tube that has long since rotted away, it would be the world's first telescope. It suggests that the exaltation of Ishtar wasn't just mythology, it was observation. The existence of the Nimrud lens proves that the ancient world wasn't blind. They had the technology to manipulate light, to correct their own vision, and perhaps to peer into the darkness of space millennia before we thought it possible. The lens sits in a museum case today, clouded by age, but the question remains. What did the Assyrian kings see when they held it up to the night sky? And why did we forget how to make it? The Viking Sunstone. For centuries, historians have been baffled by a logistical impossibility. How did the Vikings dominate the North Atlantic? These weren't coastal huggers. They sailed thousands of miles across open, freezing ocean to reach Iceland, Greenland, and North America, centuries before Columbus. The problem is the weather. The North Atlantic is notorious for perpetual fog, heavy cloud cover, and long summer days where the stars, the primary navigation tool of the ancient world, are invisible. They had no magnetic compasses. By all conventional logic, they should have been sailing blind. But they weren't. They had a device that allowed them to see the sun even when it was completely hidden. For decades, this device was considered a myth, mentioned only in the sagas. In the Raudulf's Thadr, the tale of Raudulf, King Olaf visits a peasant named Sigurd, who claims he can find the sun's position in a blizzard. The king, skeptical, tests him. Sigurd pulls out a Solarstein, a sunstone, holds it up to the gray, snow-choked sky, and accurately points to the invisible sun. Mainstream archaeology dismissed this as Viking magic or storytelling folklore. They insisted the Vikings relied on lucky guessing or watching birds. But in 1967, Danish archaeologist Thorkild Ramskov proposed a radical theory. The magic was actually advanced optics. He suggested the sunstone was a crystal of optical calcite, also known as Iceland spar. This mineral has a unique property called birefringence, or double refraction. When light passes through it, it splits into two beams. By rotating the crystal and looking for the point where the two beams equalize in brightness, a navigator can detect the polarization of light. Here is the science the Vikings hacked. Sunlight is polarized. Even when heavy clouds obscure the sun, the polarization pattern of the light remains detectable. The sunstone acts exactly like a modern polarization filter. By scanning the sky with the crystal, a Viking navigator could pinpoint the sun's azimuth to within a single degree of accuracy, even in dense fog or twilight. They had built a solar compass that worked without the sun. The skepticism ended in 2013 with the discovery of the Alderney shipwreck, an Elizabethan vessel from 1592 found in the English Channel. Buried in the wreckage, right next to the navigational dividers, was a block of Iceland spar. Why would a 16th century ship, which already had magnetic compasses, carry a Viking stone? Because magnetic compasses are unreliable near the massive iron deposits of the north, and useless if they get demagnetized. The sunstone was the ultimate backup, a piece of ancient tech that was still superior to the gadgets of the Renaissance. The Vikings didn't possess supernatural powers. They possessed a deep, empirical understanding of light physics. They realized that the sky held hidden data, polarized light rings that the human eye couldn't see, but a stone could. While the rest of Europe was hugging the shore, terrified of the fog of death, the Vikings looked through their crystal lenses and saw a highway. They were using a polarization sensor 1,000 years before we put them on cameras. Heng's Seismoscope. In 132 AD, the imperial court of the Han dynasty faced a terrifying, invisible enemy, earthquakes. They struck without warning, flattening cities and crushing peasants. The emperor needed a way to see the disaster before the reports arrived by horse, days too late to send aid. Enter Zhang Heng, the Da Vinci of ancient China. Astronomer, mathematician, and engineer, he presented a large bronze jar, 6 feet wide, to the court. He called it the Hufeng Di Dong Yi, the instrument for measuring the seasonal winds and the movements of the earth. We call it the world's first seismoscope. To the court officials, it looked like art. It was decorated with 8 dragons facing down, each holding a copper ball in its mouth. Below each dragon sat an open-mouthed toad. Zhang Heng claimed that when an earthquake occurred, even one too distant to be felt in the capital, a mechanism inside the jar would trigger, causing a specific dragon to drop its ball into the toad below. The clang of the ball would not only alert the court, but the direction of the dragon would reveal exactly where the quake had struck. The officials were skeptical. A machine that could detect a vibration hundreds of miles away? It sounded like magic. Then one day, a dragon facing west dropped its ball. Clang! The court froze. No one in the capital felt a thing. No ground shook, no tea spilled. The critics laughed. They accused Zhang Heng of building a toy that relied on random chance. But days later, a rider arrived from the western Longxi region, breathless and covered in dust. He reported a massive earthquake that had devastated the province. At the exact moment the dragon had dropped the ball, the laughter stopped. Zhang Heng hadn't just built a sensor. He had built a machine that could feel the Earth's pulse. But the real mystery is how it worked. The internal mechanism is lost to history. But modern replications suggest it used a highly sensitive pendulum, or an inverted pendulum system, a central pillar that would tilt in the direction of the shock wave, triggering a lever. This requires an understanding of inertia and wave propagation that shouldn't have existed in the 2nd century. To filter out noise, like a passing cart or a stomping guard, and only react to the specific P waves and S waves of a tectonic shift, requires a level of calibration that modern engineers struggle to replicate with bronze gears. Zhang Heng's device was so advanced that after his death, the technology was lost. Chinese scientists tried to rebuild it in subsequent centuries but failed. It wasn't until the modern era, with 19th century European seismographs, that we regained the ability to track earthquakes with this level of precision. Zhang Heng built a device that could detect the invisible shock waves of the planet. He proved that the Earth is always speaking. We just lacked the ears to hear it until he built them out of bronze. The Chinese magic mirrors. In the museums of the world, there are thousands of ancient bronze mirrors. To the naked eye, they look unremarkable, a polished reflective surface on the front, and a decorative design, usually dragons or clouds, cast into the bronze on the back. But a handful of them, dating back to the Han Dynasty, 2006 BC 24 AD, possess a property so baffling that for centuries it was considered sorcery. They are called magic mirrors, or makyu in Japanese. When you look into the mirror, you see only your own reflection. The front surface is perfectly smooth and solid bronze. But if you take that mirror and reflect a bright beam of sunlight onto a white wall, something impossible happens. The reflection on the wall doesn't just show a disk of light. It shows the decorative pattern from the back of the mirror. It looks as if the solid metal has become transparent, allowing the light to pass through the bronze and project the image from the rear. For over 1,000 years, no one could explain how it worked. In ancient China, they were prized as windows to the soul, believed to reveal hidden truths, because they could see through solid metal. It wasn't until the 20th century, using modern optical theory, that we cracked the code, and the answer reveals a level of manufacturing precision that rivals modern nanotechnology. The mirrors aren't transparent. The secret lies in imperceptible curvature. When the ancient artisans cast the mirror, the decorative pattern on the back created different thicknesses in the metal. During the polishing process of the front face, the thinner parts of the mirror, where the design was deep, would flex slightly more than the thicker parts. As the mirror sprang back, it created microscopic bumps and dips on the smooth front surface. These variations are incredibly small, only a few hundred nanometers high. That is smaller than a wavelength of light. The human eye cannot see them. To us, the mirror looks perfectly flat, but light is unforgiving. When the beam hits the surface, these nanobumps scatter the light just enough to reproduce the image from the back on a distant wall. This is essentially a primitive form of holographic projection using stress mechanics. What is terrifying is the consistency. This wasn't a one-off accident. The Han Dynasty mass-produced these. They had a quality control process for creating surfaces with nanometer-level precision, using only hand tools and intuition. When Western scientists first encountered them in the 1800s, they couldn't replicate them. Even today, making a true magic mirror requires specific alloys and quenching techniques that are mostly lost. The ancients didn't just polish metal. They understood that the surface of reality hides information that only the right light can reveal. They built a device that proved just because a surface looks smooth doesn't mean it isn't hiding a secret message. The Lycurgus Cup. In the British Museum sits a seemingly ordinary Roman chalice from the 4th century AD. It depicts the mythical king Lycurgus entangled in vines. In normal daylight, the glass appears an opaque, muddy pea green. It looks like a relic of crude ancient craftsmanship. But when museum curators first placed a light inside the cup to illuminate it from behind, they gasped. The glass didn't just glow, it changed its fundamental nature. The opaque green vanished, replaced by a deep, translucent, glowing blood red. For decades, this dichroic, two-color effect was a mystery. Scientists assumed it was a chemical accident, a fluke of impurities in the glass melt. But in 1990, researchers decided to look closer. They placed fragments of the glass under a transmission electron microscope, and what they saw shouldn't have been there. The glass was impregnated with particles of silver and gold. But these weren't just filings. They were ground down to a precise diameter of 50 nanometers. To put that in perspective, that is 1,000th the size of a grain of salt. It is roughly the scale of a virus. This is nanotechnology. The Romans didn't just melt gold, they engineered it at the atomic level. At this specific nano size, the electrons in the metal vibrate in a way that eliminates the blue spectrum of light while letting the red pass through, a phenomenon known as surface plasmon resonance. Here is the shortcut realization. You cannot create 50 nanometer particles by smashing gold with a hammer. You need advanced chemical processes to precipitate these metals out of solution at a specific controlled rate. Furthermore, the ratio was exact, 3 parts silver to 1 part gold, with traces of copper. If the ratio changes, the color doesn't work. If the particle size changes, the effect vanishes. This implies the Roman glassmakers had a controlled, repeatable manufacturing process for manipulating matter at the molecular scale. 1,600 years before modern. Science invented nanotechnology in the 1980s, but it gets stranger. Modern physicists realize that this specific type of nanostructure turns the cup into a high-tech sensor. When different liquids are poured into the cup, they interact with the electrons in the gold particles, slightly altering the color. In a 2013 experiment, scientists used a replica of this glass to detect changes in the salinity of liquids. The glass was 100 times more sensitive than commercial sensors. This means the Lycurgus Cup wasn't just a party trick, it was potentially a poison detector. If you poured pure wine, it glowed red. If the wine was tainted or diluted, the optical resonance would shift, changing the hue. The ancients didn't have electron microscopes, yet they mastered the quantum behavior of metals. They built a device that could see the chemical composition of a liquid and alert the drinker with a warning light. We arrogantly assume the Romans only knew how to build roads and aqueducts. The Lycurgus Cup proves they were also building machines out of atoms. The Antikythera Mechanism. In 1901, divers exploring a shipwreck off the island of Antikythera found a corroded lump of bronze that looked like a rock. It sat in a museum storage box, ignored for 2 years, until the wood casing dried out and split open, revealing a complex system of gear wheels inside. This wasn't just a clock, it was an analog computer dated to around 150 BCE. For decades, historians refused to believe it. The gear teeth were cut with a precision that wouldn't be seen again until 18th century Swiss watchmaking. It seemed impossible for the ancient Greeks to possess such technology. But when modern X-ray tomography scanned the device in 2005, the impossible became undeniable. Inside the corrosion were 30 interlocking bronze gears, calibrated to track the movements of the sun, moon, and 5 known planets. But it didn't just track them, it predicted them. The device could see into the future. By turning a hand crank, the user could advance time forwards or backwards by decades. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses to the hour, even adjusting for the elliptical orbit of the moon, a variation known as the lunar anomaly, using a pin and slot mechanism that mimics Kepler's laws of planetary motion. Laws that wouldn't be discovered for another 1700 years. It gets deeper. The mechanism didn't just track astronomy, it tracked social time. It had a dial for the Olympiad cycle, telling the user exactly when the next Olympic Games would be held. But the most chilling detail is the eclipse dial. It didn't just predict darkness, it predicted the color of the eclipse, used for astrological divination. This machine was designed to decode the will of the gods. Why is this forbidden? Because its existence proves that our timeline of technology is broken. The complexity of the Antikythera mechanism suggests it wasn't a prototype, it was a refined product. There must have been earlier versions, and likely many more like it. If the Greeks had mechanical computers capable of differential gearing in 100 BC, where did that knowledge go? The fall of Rome didn't just end an empire, it seemingly rebooted human intelligence. The Antikythera mechanism is the only survivor of a lost industrial revolution. A solitary witness to a time when brass gears calculated the heartbeat of the universe. The Olmec Hematite compass. Open any history textbook, and it will tell you that the magnetic compass was invented in China during the Han Dynasty, roughly around 200 BCE, and later refined for navigation in the 11th century. We are told that before this moment, humanity had no way to detect the invisible magnetic field of the Earth. We were directionless, relying solely on the stars and the sun. But in the dense jungles of Veracruz, Mexico, an artifact was pulled from the Earth that destroys this timeline completely. The artifact is known as M160. It was discovered at the archaeological site of San Lorenzo, the capital of the mysterious Olmec civilization. The Olmecs are often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, predating the Maya and the Aztecs. They are famous for their colossal stone heads, but their most advanced technology fits in the palm of your hand. M160 is a bar of hematite, dated to approximately 1000 BCE. That is a full millennium before the Chinese invention. To the untrained eye, M160 looks like a polished decorative bar, or perhaps a tool for leatherworking. But in the 1970s, astronomer John Carlson looked closer. He noticed that the artifact wasn't just shaped, it was engineered. The bar was ground with extreme precision from a single piece of lodestone-rich hematite. It features a distinct groove running along its length, which puzzled archaeologists. Why carve a groove into a decorative rock? Carlson had a hunch. He suspected the groove wasn't for decoration. It was a sighting line. He took the artifact and subjected it to a test that would have seemed insane to traditional historians. He floated the heavy hematite bar on a piece of cork in a bowl of water, and later liquid mercury to reduce friction. The result was immediate and undeniable. The bar spun, it oriented itself, and it stopped, pointing consistently 35.5 degrees west of magnetic north. This wasn't random chance. The bar was a fully functional, high-precision compass needle. The groove allowed the user to sight distant landmarks along this specific magnetic alignment. But here is where the mystery deepens. Why 35.5 degrees west of north? If you look at the layout of Olmec cities, particularly sites like Leventa, they are not aligned to true north. They are oriented roughly 8 degrees west of north. For decades, archaeologists assumed this was just a quirky cultural preference. But when you calculate the position of the magnetic North Pole in 1000 BCE, taking into account the shifting of the Earth's magnetic field over 3,000 years, the alignment of the compass matches the alignment of their architecture. The Olmecs weren't just guessing. They were seeing the invisible magnetic grid of the planet. They used this device to practice a form of geomancy, similar to Chinese feng shui, where the placement of temples, tombs, and even the colossal heads had to align with the flow of the Earth's energy. This changes our entire understanding of the ancient Americas. We often view them as Stone Age because they didn't use metal tools. But M160 proves they possessed a sophisticated understanding of magnetism and physics. They understood that the Earth was alive with invisible forces. Furthermore, the craftsmanship of the bar is staggering. Hematite is a dense, hard iron oxide. To grind it into such a perfectly balanced shape without iron tools would require thousands of hours of abrasion. They didn't do this for art. You don't spend a year grinding a rock just to look at it. You do it because it is a scientific instrument essential to your civilization's survival. The existence of the Olmec compass suggests that the discovery of magnetism didn't happen in the Old World. It happened here, in the jungles of Mexico, 1,000 years earlier. While the Greeks were still figuring out basic geometry, the Olmecs were floating polished iron mirrors on water, watching the invisible hand of the planet guide them. They didn't need to see the stars to know where they were. They could feel the pull of the pole itself. The Olmecs had unlocked a sixth sense of the planet, detecting a field that no human eye could see, proving once again that the history of technology is far older and far more global than we are allowed to believe. The Baghdad Battery. In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König was rummaging through the storage of the National Museum of Iraq. He found a dusty clay jar, about 5 inches tall, that had been unearthed at Kujut Rabu near Baghdad. At first glance, it looked like standard pottery from the Parthian period, around 200 BCE. But when König looked inside, he realized this wasn't for storing grain or wine. It was a piece of electrical hardware. The jar contained a rolled-up copper sheet, forming a cylinder. Inside that copper cylinder, but separated by a layer of asphalt, bitumen, to prevent contact, was an iron rod. The top was sealed with more asphalt, like a primitive plug. König, who had an understanding of mechanics, recognized the configuration immediately. Copper, iron, electrolyte, separation. This wasn't a vase. It was a galvanic cell. When you fill this jar with an acidic liquid, like grape juice, vinegar, or lemon juice, a chemical reaction occurs between the copper and the iron. Electrons flow from one metal to the other. It generates a voltage. König published a paper declaring that the ancients had discovered electricity nearly 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta invented the battery in 1800. Mainstream archaeology panicked. They tried to dismiss it as a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, claiming the metal bits were just scroll holders. But this explanation fails the shortcut logic test. Why use 2 different metals, iron and copper? Why insulate them with asphalt? Why create a watertight seal if you're just storing paper? The design is specifically engineered for electron flow. After World War II, a General Electric engineer named Willard Gray built a replica. He filled it with grape juice. It worked. It produced about 1.5 to 2 volts of electricity, not enough to power a city, but enough to do something equally magical: electroplating. Gray proved that if you connected several of these jars in a series, you could use the current to plate a thin layer of gold onto a silver object. This explains a long-standing mystery of ancient jewelry. How did craftsmen create gold artifacts that were actually silver cores, with a gold layer so thin and perfect that it couldn't have been hammered? They didn't hammer it, they plated it. But the implications go further. If the Parthians or the Sassanids had batteries, what else did they power? Some researchers have linked these batteries to the Dendera light theory in Egypt. If you have a light bulb, the Crookes tube, you need a power source. The Baghdad Battery provides the missing link. A bank of these jars, wired together, could easily sustain a low-voltage glow in a vacuum tube. The existence of the Baghdad Battery proves that electricity wasn't invented in the Enlightenment. It was observed, harnessed, and utilized in the ancient world. The ancients could see the invisible flow of electrons. They understood that if you combine the right metals with the right acid, you create an invisible force, a magic fluid that can turn silver into gold or banish the darkness. The tragedy is that this knowledge was siloed. It was likely kept as a trade secret by jewelers or priests, used to awe the masses with miracles. When the civilization fell, the secret died with the guild masters, leaving only these clay pots behind, silent witnesses to a time when the Middle East was already plugged in. The Inca obsidian mirrors. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire ruled a territory that stretched for thousands of miles. They had no written language, yet they managed a complex bureaucracy. They had no horses, yet they moved armies swiftly. And according to the Spanish conquistadors, they had a way to see across vast distances. The key to this power was obsidian. The Inca and the cultures before them were masters of this volcanic glass. They didn't just nap it into blades, they polished it into perfectly flat circular mirrors. These black mirrors were not for vanity. They were tools of the priesthood and the nobility. When the Spanish arrived, they confiscated thousands of these mirrors, often destroying them as tools of the devil. Why? Because the Inca priests claimed they could use them to see things that were happening far away. Mainstream anthropology classifies this as scrying, a form of divination where the user stares into a reflective surface to induce a trance state. And certainly the psychological effect of staring into the deep black void of obsidian is powerful. But let's apply the shortcut lens. Was there a physical technology here? Obsidian is a natural glass. When polished to a specific concave curvature, it becomes a parabolic reflector. There are accounts that suggest the Inca used these mirrors for heliographic signaling, using sunlight to flash Morse code-like messages across mountain peaks. In the thin air of the Andes, a flash from a polished obsidian mirror can be seen for dozens of miles. By setting up a network of chasquis, runners, and mirror stations on the peaks, the Inca could transmit information at the speed of light, much faster than a runner could carry it. They were seeing the message from the next mountain before the messenger even arrived. But there is a darker, more forbidden aspect. Some of the mirrors found in tombs are concave and ground to a specific focal point. If you align two parabolic mirrors perfectly, you create an acoustic coupler. You can whisper into one mirror, and the sound will be projected and heard clearly by someone standing at the focal point of the second mirror, hundreds of feet away. This is a known physics demonstration today. Did the Inca priests use this to hear the unseen? Imagine standing in a plaza and suddenly hearing the voice of the emperor, who is standing on a distant pyramid, whispering directly into your ear. It would seem like telepathy. It would seem like the gods were speaking. The Inca obsidian mirrors were likely a multi-purpose technology, part long-range optical telegraph, part acoustic surveillance device, and part psychological tool. They understood that information was power. By controlling the light and sound of the Andes, they created an illusion of omnipresence. The Spanish destroyed the mirrors because they feared what the Inca could see. They didn't realize they were destroying the optical fiber network of the ancient world, the Dogon star knowledge. In the remote cliffs of Bandiagara in Mali, West Africa, live a tribe known as the Dogon. They possess no telescopes, no observatories, and no glass lenses. Yet, for centuries their priests have guarded a cosmological secret that modern science only confirmed in the 20th century. They knew about the invisible star. The Dogon mythology centers around the star Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. But the Dogon claim that Sirius has a companion. They call it Po-Tolo, the star of the deep beginning. They describe it as incredibly small, invisible to the human eye, yet extremely heavy. The heaviest star in the universe. They claim it orbits Sirius in an elliptical path every 50 years. Here is the problem. Sirius B, the companion star, is a white dwarf. It is the dense, collapsed core of a dead star. It is completely invisible to the naked eye. It was not mathematically predicted by Western astronomers until 1844, and not photographed until 1970. Yet the Dogon have been performing a ritual dance called the Sigi every 60 years to honor this orbit for centuries. When French anthropologists Marcel Griol and Germaine Dieterlen lived with the Dogon in the 1930s, the elders drew diagrams in the sand. They drew the specific elliptical orbit of Sirius B around Sirius A. They drew the star as being off-center, a detail that matches Kepler's laws of orbital mechanics. They even stated that the star rotates on its own axis, a fact impossible to know without advanced spectroscopy. How did a tribe in the West African desert see a white dwarf star? Skeptics argue that the Dogon must have met a European traveler with a telescope in the 1920s who told them the news. This is the contamination theory. But it fails to explain why the Sigwai masks used to celebrate the orbit have been dated back hundreds of years. It fails to explain why the concept of the heavy invisible seed is woven into the very fabric of their creation. Well, myths, not just tacked on as a footnote. The Dogon claim they were taught this knowledge by the Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from the sky in a spinning arc. Whether you believe in ancient contact or not, the data remains undeniable. The Dogon saw a celestial body that is physically impossible for a human to see. They knew the density of a white dwarf before we knew what atoms were. While Europe was burning witches, the Dogon were calculating orbital periods of invisible stars. They proved that you don't always need a glass lens to see the unseen. Sometimes you just need to know who to ask. The Vatican Chronovisor. And finally, the ultimate forbidden invention, the one that doesn't just see through walls or space, but through time itself. In the early 1950s, a Benedictine monk named Father Pellegrino Ernetti, who was also a respected physicist and musicologist, made a shocking confession. He claimed that hidden deep within the Vatican's archives was a device that functioned as a time viewer. He called it the Chronovisor. Ernetti wasn't a fringe lunatic. He was a recognized authority on pre-polyphony and held a chair at the Benedetto Marcello Conservatory in Venice. He claimed that he didn't build this machine alone. He worked with a team of 12 world-class scientists, including Wernher von Braun, the father of rocketry, and Enrico Fermi, the Nobel Prize winner who built the first nuclear reactor. The science behind the Chronovisor was based on a radical principle. Energy is never destroyed. It only changes form. Ernetti argued that every sound wave and light wave ever emitted by a human being still exists, floating in the ether, simply decaying into different forms of electromagnetic radiation. He claimed the Chronovisor worked like a trans-dimensional radio. By tuning into these specific residual frequencies, the team could reconstruct the sights and sounds of the past, just like a TV receiver reconstructs a broadcast signal. They didn't travel in time, they watched it. Ernetti claimed they tuned in to see the Roman Senate in 63 BC, listening to a speech by Cicero. He claimed they watched the production of a lost tragedy by the poet Quintus Ennius. But the most controversial claim was that they tuned the machine to the year 33 AD. They watched the Last Supper. They watched the crucifixion. Ernetti even produced a photograph of the face of Christ on the cross as proof, a photo that was later attacked by skeptics as a reproduction of a wooden carving, though Ernetti maintained until his death that the machine was real. Why is this? Invention forbidden? Ernetti stated that the team and the Pope, Pius XII, agreed to dismantle the device. They realized that a machine that could see anything, past, present, or future private moments, would destroy the concept of privacy. It would create the most fearsome dictatorship the world has ever seen. The blueprints were reportedly confiscated by the Vatican and locked in the secret archives. Skeptics call it a hoax. But in 2002, François Brun, another priest and author, revealed that Ernetti had confessed the truth to him. The machine worked, but the technology was too dangerous for humanity. The Chronovisor represents the ultimate shortcut. It suggests that history isn't a book we have to guess at. It is a signal we just need to learn how to decode. If the sound waves of the past are still vibrating around us, then nothing is truly lost. It's just waiting for someone to build the right antenna. 11 inventions. One conclusion: we have been led to believe that the ancient world was blind, deaf, and primitive. But the evidence, from the nanotech of Rome to the time-viewing theories of the Vatican, tells a different story. They saw the microscopic, they saw the magnetic, they saw the future. The ancients weren't stumbling in the dark, they had night vision. If you want to keep seeing what the history books are hiding, click that subscribe button. The Shortcut Detective is just getting started.